Joy! Oh! Panjalan nyo kadang-kadang mangayo. Kadang-kadang ingin kumurong eh. Pwede nga yung ko eh. Kali kadang-kadang nagpuma.
For over 50,000 years, our people have lived in Greater Australia, leaving traces of their story everywhere they went. By 30,000 years ago, they were flourishing in every corner of the continent. But they were about to be challenged like never before. A 10,000-year ice age brought glaciers to the mountain ranges and transformed Greater Australia into 90% desert. This is the story of how people survived the longest and most severe drought in human history. Hidden deep in Arnhem Land in northern Australia is the longest historical record of life on the planet. Ronald Lammy-Lammy's family were the last people to live and paint at the Jillery Rock shelters just 50 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yep. So beautiful. See this? It's a ship sort of head on.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
There's a cruise liner, a battleship, and a biplane from last century. Above them, a European sailing ship from the 1800s. Underneath is a turtle painted centuries earlier. There are over 3,000 images on the walls of Jillery, painted over each other, layer upon layer, stretching back tens of thousands of years.
Luka beja, yumira oni propara kanon, ularo. Pun namu muya kwari mu yumira okuni, yumira oni. Luka ba ngari ngaro iwaro. Kaya kala lanyo. Kurung bawuro. Kurung bana mangaro da ngari ngaro da. Ulo, ulari, iwaro ta.
The most remarkable painting in this historical encyclopedia is found across the valley. Ronald's ancestors painted one of Greater Australia's extinct giant animals, or megafauna, the marsupial lion. The painting rewrites our history as we entered the last ice age.
Isn't that incredible?
It is.
It's like nothing else.
The marsupial lion was thought to have died out over 40,000 years ago. Well before the oldest dated painting in Australia.
the nose is too big for a thylacine. It's huge, powerful jaw and snout.
Especially over here.
Yeah.
That's going to be able to crunch. It's like a huge pig dog, but even bigger. It can crunch down.
Yeah.
Which is why lion, marsupial lion.
That's the best candidate.
So with this animal, with the marsupial lion, how big that would be?
It's big. It's really big, and they've got really large mouths, and the teeth are enormous, and they're able to actually leap and attack a large animal. They would definitely be big enough and powerful enough to attack a human. They're meant to go extinct over 40,000 years ago, but I can't see what else it can be.
Either they survived much more recently than most people think from the fossil evidence in other parts of Australia, or this painting is much, much older than anything else in Australia, or a bit of both. But either way, this is just incredible.
The painting challenges the theory that soon after arriving in Greater Australia, people hunted the megafauna to extinction. In other parts of the world, mass extinctions of megafauna were common when people first entered virgin lands. But a recent discovery by the Burradabana in Queensland suggests people lived with megafauna for 25,000 years, right up to the Ice Age.
You picked it up, we looked at it, I said, that's rock.
Yeah, that's right. We looked at each other and I said, this is a fossil.
Yeah.
And we were so excited. Once we started looking, that's when we started to notice other fragments, and we're like, this is just not one piece. This is like a whole site.
This individual specimen is a single molar, just a single tooth from one of these giant wombats. Crocodile tooth. It's just the top of the tooth. There's one we found the other day. The tooth is about that long, 15 centimetres long. And the bone right here is a femur from a giant kangaroo. It would have been about that long in life. So that's just the thigh bone. The shin bone that we know that would come to an animal of this size would be about a metre long. So if you think of a kangaroo's leg, it had these massive toes for its foot, and then up into the shin to about a metre, and then back up to the hip. So the actual hip of the animal would be at eye line with me right now. So that's just the hip, and then the rest of it goes up. The range of species that we're getting at this particular site, it's quite phenomenal. The animals and plants and all of the creatures that we have here have been evolving in isolation for at least 65 million years. The first Australians have never seen anything like it before. Things like Diprotodon, a 2.5-ton marsupial, just like a bear with a pouch, huge animal. 6-metre-long lizards. These are massive animals. They're basically a Komodo dragon, but twice the size, 3 times the size. Huge animal. We also have 5-metre-long crocodilians, these things called Palimnarchus, living in the creeks and streams at the time. The reptile-dominated environment would have been nothing like anywhere else on Earth. They're the largest living predators since the time of the dinosaurs.
First time they ever come across one of those huge crocodiles would have been one of the most scariest things, I reckon. Yeah.
We probably captured a single death accumulation. So one crocodile bringing in lots of different individuals. They throw their prey around and the limbs and the legs and the tails and things get flung off, and that's what we're actually finding. Here we have the thigh bone from a giant kangaroo, and what Michelle is doing is covering it in a liquid glue of aquadeer. That solidifies the specimen in the ground. We're focusing on this particular site because the preliminary dates range in age between 25 and 28,000 years old. If the next dating system that we use actually verifies that, then we've got the youngest megafauna site in Australia. And that's really exciting because not only will that show that megafauna survived the 45,000-year extinction event, but they actually overlapped with humans for at least 25,000 years. The potential of your discovery, Beck, is that you can rewrite prehistory of Australia. We basically dispel the overkill, the blitzkrieg hypotheses of humans coming in, hunting everything out of existence.
If people were living with the megafauna for 25,000 years, it's unlikely they were responsible for wiping out these giant animals. Climate change is a much more likely candidate. 30,000 years ago, the last ice age began. Increasingly, it became colder and drier. In tropical Queensland, even the wetlands were driven into extreme drought. It seems to have tipped the megafauna over the edge.
Australia becomes so arid that all of this dries up. All of the trees would have gone, all of the browsing animals wouldn't have any feed. All you're left with is these open grasslands, and even less than that, maybe just a dust bowl. Everything that was living around the environment here would have disappeared, and perhaps the only places for things to survive right up on the mountain ranges. And that's where the next story would be, to look into the human story about how they adapted to this massive peak in aridity and why they survived and the megafauna didn't.
Unlike the megafauna, people were able to move and adapt quickly to new environments. By 20,000 years ago, the Ice Age was at its most extreme. Glaciers formed on the mountain ranges. Deserts expanded from 60 to 90% of the continent. At the Willandra Lakes, sand dunes crept right to the edge of the shrinking lake system. Nighttime temperatures reached as low as 25 degrees below freezing. It's difficult to imagine anyone living here. Yet on the shores of this now dry lake is one of the most incredible Ice Age discoveries in the world. Footprints of men, women, and children made 20,000 years ago.
To be able to look back and say, well, those prints were left there by my ancestors, you know. I think they were a very special breed of people.
I reckon a footprint is it's a very personal signature of an individual, isn't it? You know, it's it's like your handshake or your smile.
The elders and scientists are checking the condition of the footprints.
We've covered up the surface. It was it's about the size of 2 tennis courts, and we've had to cover it up with sand and sandbags and shade cloth to conserve the surface. We didn't want it to deteriorate any further.
Over 450 footprints lie under the protective layer. When the footprints were first discovered, the elders at Lake Mungo invited Pindaby trackers Paddy Jupranunkaluas and Johnny Juprala Angus to interpret them.
Chokurba, Trimin, Willia Pankaja, Yoa,
Born in the central deserts of Australia, they are among the last people with traditional skills to understand the subtle marks in sand and clay.
They were able to look at some of the marks on the track and show us things we had no idea. We actually didn't know the marks were there.
What the trackers revealed was an intimate snapshot of life 20,000 years ago.
Kanda. Number one woman, no? Kanda. Number one, Kinda Pariano Koro, wherever. Yamba Bangaja.
A group of women and children walk towards a depression in the ground, possibly a waterhole to splash around in. Catching up with them was a young child, playfully curving around to join the group again.
You've got the formed feet, but it's the feet of these people that walked around. Children, young children, some perhaps as young as 3 or 4 years old. Women, men, we are reaching back across time.
Intersecting the tracks of the women and children are an astounding set of prints.
One leg, Kinda Poranji Bangaja. You are one are Kinda Poranji. Okunchik. But Okunchik.
There is a couple of marks which do suggest he might have been using a stick, but this is definitely a one-legged man. And this is the distance between his hops. When you explain this to someone, that we've got somebody hopping that sort of pace, it's very hard to believe.
The one-legged man chased a kangaroo with 3 other men running at incredible speeds.
Number now. The Sunny Amaldu. Now one. Number one of Luajilibu. Marlu. Kangaroo. Oh. Kerimbai. Long one. Kerimbai.
This print is significant because, one, it's a big foot. It's about 29.5 centimetres. So we've got a pace of 3.7 metres. Once you've got the pace and you've got the length of the foot, you can then calculate stature. And then from there, of course, you go on to calculate speed. It's probably about 192, 194 centimetres tall. The top speed on here recorded so far is 37 kilometres an hour. This is a difficult number to accept because this is around the Olympic 100-metre speeds. It's probably a burst here. It's not sustained over 100 metres. It may be. But why shouldn't these people be as athletic as we can be? You've got to face it, that unless you catch your dinner, you're going to starve. And these people have to catch their dinner every day. If he's got this power and he's got this strength and he's a really good runner, I can only assume he's having good nutrition. And this is obviously somebody that's living in the height of the Ice Age.
Back then, there was almost no rain, but people did have water. The dwindling lake system was kept alive with glacial melt from the snowy mountains hundreds of kilometres away. The traditional owners and archaeologists have begun an ambitious study of the entire Willandra Lake system to get a detailed picture of life right through the Ice Age.
My family's always stayed on country, but we looked after it in a different way to what our ancestors done. Even though I'm not fishing out in the lake or lighting a fire, I'm still here doing work, still on country, but different things, yeah. I suppose it's called adaptation, isn't it? Moving with the times, yeah.
Thousands of fire hearths and animal bones are revealed as the sandy lunettes erode. Stone tools lie just as their maker left them.
He goes there like that. I'm molding something that someone made 20,000 years ago. Probably would have cut a bit of meat or skinned something. Plenty of uses.
By 15,000 years ago, the Willandra Lakes had finally dried up. Yet people stayed on.
Well, what we have here is a baked sediment half. Just come around here. You can see where it's eroded out. And in this half, we've got some silkite stone, nap stone that's come off that nodule down there. Also have burnt bone. This one has got some cut marks in it. Most likely this got cut with one of these little stone silkite flakes here. Probably that one there. Looks like a nice sharp edge.
Just to go for the big picture, you know, we're sitting on one little portion of the Munga Lunette, but the whole Lunette is like 33 kilometres long. And it's really only if you systematically walk out the Lunette and monitor sites, as Darryl has been monitoring sites, that you get to appreciate just how much is here.
Back then, had different material, got their food a different way. Instead of people going to the supermarket, they had the supermarket out here on the ground in the lake there. Yeah. That's first organic food, isn't it?
Despite living through some of the most extreme conditions people have ever known, the evidence at the Willandra Lakes tells a story of people thriving throughout the Ice Age. It's a similar story in many arid parts of the continent. How was this possible? In the deserts of Western Australia, the answer was to develop over truly vast distances an encyclopedic knowledge of every plant, animal, and water source.
Yo, jangan gula tu, nak aku jangan lagi. Tanya ni nak jono yan, jangan kau yang kau kuari, malah kau nak ngulam pa.
Timmy Patterson was raised in the Western Desert before contact with Europeans. His parents brought him to this spring at Binbee.
Good morning.
What are you doing?
Of course, you're going hunting.
Yeah.
Get us a wallaby.
The Maru have been bringing their families to Binpi for tens of thousands of years.
Hello. Lifetime carry. Till kuari ni all people jayu jamu main one. Anu ni re malam anu jadi. Yang kalau dulu kan. Wal jila lagi no tino belau mangunjo. Ini an one place. Bila jadi belau apa? Madogo. Ya jadi merah guna, ya wanggang guna ruan. Pukul lagi munga cara. Jadi beri willing pakuling gulai. Dan kuat. Pagi ni win no win. Nong aja pukul lagi. Kira jalan baju tuljo, olbi buljo. Bangga ko ya cunggian ko ya. Sabil kaya cunggian ko. Ngana dai mo ya mala ko dik. Yang dia barang yang ko mala ko dik ya. Bangga ko ya pilih pukul dik.
Before the Ice Age, when Timmy's ancestors first came to Binpi, the surrounding lands were wetter, the animals and plants different and more abundant. As the Ice Age worsened, they saw their world drying out around them.
The landscape became much, much harsher. Much, much harsher. And to some extent, for the first time, groups who were adapted to semi-arid conditions were confronted with what it meant to be a desert person.
In the little sandy desert, decades could pass with no rain at all. To survive, Timmy's ancestors had to know exactly where the water was and when it would be there.
Journal, spring. That thing will keep you alive. Guide you straight into the water or another way. If you don't find it, well, that's it. There's a story, there's a meaning to that song now. Like, you know, where the soap is. That's how the people was moving. Like I'm sample up here. I'm in this spring. There's the nearest, another one is here. And I gotta go from there to there. If I can get to there, cut in, straight in. You know? That's how they was using in their head. And they told us, and we got their line.
Proper song line.
Yeah, proper song line, yeah. They had in their head. And this thing is gone over, like the generation.
So some of these waters, like this one, are pretty well permanent. You can always go there, and you always know you can get fresh water no matter what the time, even during a drought.
Yeah.
But other rock holes might be dried up.
Yeah.
So these main ones are like living waters?
Living water, yeah.
Yeah. But these ones might be dried up and dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous. Time to move out, what time the old people know. And they move out to the main place, especially on the drought time.
Yeah.
Summertime.
So if you went to the wrong one of these during the summertime when it's like 50 degrees, you could finish.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But because people knew these main springs like this one, and that's probably why people came here and had the big meetings. Men, women, children, because they could come together and do ceremony.
You all go separate way.
Yeah. So people survive by knowing these distributions. That's the blueprint for their survival, and they actually deploy their incredible flexibility in social organisation. They have relatives and families spread over vast distances, so they may be able to fall back on country which is 200-300 kilometres away, and that may be for as long as half a generation. With a good season, groups move back out to their territory and they use the fresh waters occurring in clay pans, rock holes. And it's that knowledge of the water sources and the plants and animals that could be found around them, and the fact that you could fall back to refuges like this during a particularly bad season or an extended drought, or indeed something as dramatic as the last ice age.
Knowledge and care of refuges was essential to life. But this alone was not enough to survive the Ice Age. Timmy's ancestors had to change their entire diet.
We can see in Lake Mungo and from Lake Gregory and from sites that we've worked on here with traditional custodians that people responded by shifting the resources they used. They went from using fruits and macropods to relying more on things like reptiles, which are common in deserts, and a whole different kind of diet. Little bush tomatoes, salam and witchetty grubs.
Even these foods were unreliable during the peak drought conditions of the Ice Age. People had to find a way to unlock the energy contained in the desert grasses that now dominate the landscape. 2 simple lumps of fine-grained rock to release the carbohydrate from the hard seeds. The grindstone. These Maru women all grew up in the desert before contact with Europeans.
You gotta use it.
That's right, the men used to do it too sometimes.
This one, two hands.
Okay, two hands?
Yeah, two
like this?
Oh.
Grinding. It's not bad for a waddy. So keeping this up for a few hours would be good exercise.
I give it for good. Because when the rain come, and seed kaja crowdima. Like Wibilara, Suderba, Calvary, Vinojara, and Wibilara Daji Badale, and like this, when our grandmothers and we put like this, and like this.
Oh, true. Licking the bowl, it's like the cake bowl. Grindstones start to become abundant when conditions become intensely dry during Australia's last ice age. The thing about grinding seeds, though, is that it's pretty labour intensive. You may have to go out and collect for many hours, and you may only get 600 or 800 kilocalories per hour in terms of processing time. But the beauty of it is that it's reliable. Grindstones like these came from quarries which were often hundreds of kilometres away. And indeed, they were so important, they could be used to actually cement social relations, if not acquire a marriage partner. The travels and the journeys of these grindstones had a life of their own. They were in fact reflected in mythological sagas and songlines, which occur throughout the central arid lands of Australia and right through here into the central Western Desert. It's almost certain that people shared information through songlines and stories about things like the grindstones. So basically, innovation, language spread, information exchange, and of course the physical movement of people, which is very mobile, if not hypermobile in Australia, pumps and projects information and invention at rates that I think most Europeans don't genuinely appreciate. It's basically a dreamtime superhighway.
Movement and communication over vast distances. Deep understanding of landscape. Methods of preparing food can all be summed up in the Western Desert word, chukulpa, the law. Crucial to the law was respect for the knowledge built up over thousands of years. It informed the relationships and power within society, and it was the social glue that enabled our ancestors to survive the Ice Age, even in the harshest of places.
Mill means, you know, it's sacred, dangerous place. What do you mill? Mill.
What in
country, sacred, dangerous.
Men's,
with a red headband, men's training. Men's law.
Anyway, when you get them, you don't want to.
No, they won't.
These Pitjantjatjara elders all grew up and were initiated in the Great Victoria Desert of South Australia. Like their ancestors, they are following the Warinyenyi songline to cross the treeless plain of the Nullarbor. It's forbidding country. There's no plant food and only 2 tiny water holes over thousands of square kilometres.
Right. Travelling through?
No,
Oh, I see. It's part of the initiation thing. The thing, the men can't talk about the ritual, religious part of dreaming, but there's some structural parts to it which I think can be told. Dreaming is a much more complex, fundamentally important apparatus within society than just the turkey went here and the bushman made the mountain. It's much more about the fundamentals of their society, and once you know and initiated and are participating in those rituals, and you also come to know the country and where you can go and where you can't go, what's safe, what will allow you to survive, what will be dangerous for you. Once you know that, this is, for me, the central importance of the law. You then become an important person in society. So, because of their knowledge of that law, the religion of the land actually configures the social politics of the community. And it's the system in which people gain status. Society is ordered.
People were using the knowledge of the law to cross the Nullarbor Plain 20,000 years ago. They made the epic journey to Canalda Cave about once a generation. They never forgot the songline that guided them here. The law also explains why they went deep inside the cave.
We're at Canalda Cave, and this is one of the most important archaeological sites in Australia. It's arguably one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Those old Pitjantjatjara men didn't come down because they're old and it's a really steep drop-off, and they're like, no, but they're not mad, we're not going down there. Well, I mean, the extraordinary thing about the site is really its majesty. It's a massive site. There's a sort of a light cathedral glow as you enter the first part of the cave. Now, in the past, I was allowed to come here with fire sticks. And the fire stick I've got here is it's actually kerosene bush, which is a native bush which has got actually a lot of resin and oil in it. So if you have two fire sticks together, you actually get a flame. And then we head down, you can see, right into the very heart of the cavern. The grandeur of the landscape inside the earth. It's astonishing. And then you compound that sensation, it's kind of surreal sensation, with the understanding that people were here 20,000 years ago.
One reason people were coming here was to mine Cunelda's highly sacred flint. The raw material is all over the walls and floor of the cave.
So you can imagine that's been, part of the rock. And there's been a strike here which has taken off a small piece there. There's been another strike here which has taken off a very small chip there, and it's snapped and fallen off there. So you've got evidence of direct manufacture, extraction, quarrying. Then they've hit it again on this platform here, and it's fallen off. And it's literally sort of slow motion falls off. As it does, you get a little bulb percussion here, a little lump, which indicates human hands, human percussion. And as the force goes through the rock, it slightly ripples against the texture, crystalline matrix of the rock, and you get this kind of hinge fracture where the force starts to reduce and then the rock snaps off. And obviously, it's so sharp, it's the perfect knife. This material is highly sacred now, today, amongst Aboriginal people that know where it is and what its stories are. It's perfect for scarification and some of the operational procedures associated with initiation. Whoa. This is radical.
Deeper into the cave are hand scratchings made all over the soft limestone walls.
Look here, look at the vertical patterns here. They've got to be purposeful handprints. They've got a long, look at this, from here, right down. I mean, when I look at this, you know, the archaeology goes and the sort of humanity comes to the fore, the proximity of the experience, because they are handprints, my hands are here. I'm standing looking at something that was done 20,000 years ago. And at first instance, it's just a small, yes, some scratchings, but then as you move down and down, and it's a very deep part of the cave, it's overwhelming.
In the very deepest recess of the cave is a clue to why people came to make their marks.
Well, we're at the squares, which is a passage. It goes from about 10 to 15 metres, right into the heart of the earth. Just enough room for my chest and stomach. Oh. I realised he went 1/4 kilometre underground, so it's a reasonably pleasant claustrophobic experience. I'm sitting on the very edge of a cliff, which is almost a 100-foot drop below me, and it falls away into a massive dome-like cavern, which if I throw this rock, you listen. Listen. Yep. All right. Terrifying location. Now, in here, there are hand scratchings, there are artefacts, there's a great lump of flint. This is where people came to, into this womb-like cavern, the very core of the earth. A Wirringa man told me 25 years ago, he's dead now, that out on the Nullarbor Plain somewhere, there was a hole where his people came from. They came out of the ground. Sitting here in this vast cavern, this quiet, deep hole in the earth, this womb-like environment in the Nullarbor Plain, this passage through, vaginal-like passage through into the outer chamber with this massive art, this hand scratching. It's almost as if people were trying to pull themselves out of the ground. You can't help feeling that this was the place he was talking about. Were initiates for many, many thousands of years, 20,000 years ago, brought into this cave to learn that ritual and leave their marks as part of the ongoing affirmation of that tradition. Rituals are very physical. Your eyes are shut, your head's down, people are there and they cram on top of you and your face is against the ground and people are screaming and it's also extremely disorientating. Having experienced that, you can imagine being here, a quarter of a kilometre underground, and having this visual experience lit by fire sticks, adding to it, if you're allowed, if you're pressed against it, made to touch and be dragged, physical presence. It's in that complication of emotion and ritual and fear and darkness and distance that this sort of thing is, I think, produced. It's more about the emotion of religious belief than actual art as we might understand it as a Western person.
The markings and the ritual were designed to indelibly imprint the teachings of the law. In this environment, knowing the law was the only way to survive.
Reconfigure it in this way. It is the last glacial maximum. It is glacial, it is cold, it is windy, it is inhospitable, it is, by every measure, unoccupiable. And yet, here we are. People are mining flint. Not just mining flint, but they're actually here engaging in probably complex, sophisticated, difficult religious practice at a time when, theoretically, they couldn't even live here. So it tells you something about the endurance of people, the adaptability of people, the vibrancy of the human spirit, and at a time, 20,000 years ago. And there's a lot to be learned from this cave about the occupation of Australia.
By 18,000 years ago, the Ice Age had reached its peak. But the devastating impact of the climate had one last sting in the tail. For the people of southwest Tasmania, the improving weather was a disaster. Here, people had lived in valleys below glaciers right through the Ice Age. They had survived by regularly setting fire to the valley floor to create grasslands ideal for hunting wombats and wallabies.
In the southwest, we have a whole group of cave sites that are occupied between about 40,000 years ago to about 13,000 years ago. And in those deposits, we find enormous quantities of one or two prey animals, particularly the Bennett's wallaby and the wombat. And they are at enormous concentrations. Like in less than a cubic metre, in Kudukina, for example, there's over 250,000 bones of these animals and probably over 40,000 stone tools. That's an extraordinary number of things left in the cave in a very small amount of soil.
Yeah, walking a minute, Pakana.
Wagaramina Cave was visited right through the Ice Age. Colin Hughes is the Heritage Officer for the Land and Sea Council. His ancestors entered the darkest corners of the cave to leave stencils of their hands.
So yeah, 2 fingers are thumb there, so there's a lefty.
But just after these hand stencils were made 13,000 years ago, this cave, along with every other site in southwest Tasmania, was abandoned. Ironically, as the weather became warmer and wetter, the conditions for people in the southwest became unlivable. During the Ice Age, it had been too cold and too dry for dense forest. As the climate improved around 13,000 years ago, the dense rainforest returned. Not even fire could keep the trees back.
One can imagine the trees coming back from the coast, choking these valleys, choking out those small patches of grasses that people hunted on, and finally bringing to an end that economic strategy that people used to survive in the very coldest and harshest time.
I'm very proud of them, mate, because they're a very tough people to survive at a time for so long, you know, hey?
But eventually, even they were driven out by the environmental changes that were brought by the changing climates.
Across this vast continent, people had survived the longest and most severe drought in the history of humanity, only to face a new challenge. Over the next 10,000 years, global warming caused the seas to rise more than 130 metres, cutting off Tasmania and New Guinea from the mainland and flooding 1/4 of the continent, transforming ecosystems, accelerating cultural change, birthing new nations.